Today I am joined by Margaret and Marci. Margaret is Marci's aunt, and Margaret is also the sister of Marci's mother, who passed away when Marci was younger. I'm so grateful that you guys would come and talk to me today. Margaret's been a friend of mine and a hiking buddy for a long time. I know her as just the most amazing, compassionate, kind woman, probably one of the most lovely women I've ever known. Marci, you could probably attest to that too. And I'm happy to meet you, Marci. So thank you for being here and joining me today.
Yeah, thank you.
Yes, thanks.
So let's go with you, Margaret. Could you give a little life sketch, a bio, tell us about yourselves, and then Marci, I'd like to hear about your life and background.
I've been a longtime friend of Julie's and raised in a family of 7 girls and 2 boys and wonderful parents, and grew up in faith and church and had a nice childhood and got married when I was 32. So I had a few adventures of going on a mission and going to graduate school and then starting my family later. But in the process of that, before that, I lost 2 sisters. And one was Glenna, who died from breast cancer at the age of 32 and had 6 children. And then Marci's mother, 4 years later, was killed from injuries from a car accident when she was 38 with 7 children.
Wow. Yeah, and that's what we're talking about today, is that specifically that grief involving Marci's mom.
Right.
Wow. Marci, can you give us a little background?
Yeah, you bet. I grew up in Southeast Idaho. I was second of 7 kids, and like Margaret, had great childhood, great parents, fun. I have great memories of growing up. Married, I have 3 kids and 1 new grandbaby,
Oh, that's the
which is
best.
delightful. Yeah, we moved like 9 times in the first 10 years of my marriage. So we saw a lot of great places, met a lot of good people, a lot of change those first few years. And then we settled down here in Boise. And I also was able to go on a mission to Japan. I loved that. And I, like you guys, I have a little hiking group and some great, good friends. Loved camp, loved the outdoors. But yeah, I had a great, great growing up years, which is interesting to be able to say because it was full of trauma at one point. But now, as I look back at it, it was a great childhood.
I appreciate that. That's a really interesting perspective, to be able to look back and see the trauma point, but to actually be able to appreciate your life as a whole. I think that's a great blessing.
Well, and I think I was fortunate because my mom died when I was 15. And so I had the bulk of that growing up years as this peaceful family, really wonderful time. Now, if you were talking to my younger brothers and sisters, I think it'd be such a different perspective because they went on to like lose a parent, well, both parents so young, and then stepmoms and stepdads, and that change would have been, I don't know what they'd say about their childhood, but I'm grateful for what I have.
Well, and I appreciate you saying that too, because that's actually a super important aspect, right, of a grief experience. Because you were 15, but you were the second oldest?
Yes, yes.
Right. So you would have absolutely had a different experience than somebody who was, how old was your youngest sibling?
Youngest was 2, so just
Wow.
wildly different as far as that experience growing, and even who raised them. I was
Yeah.
grateful. Both my parents raised me. As we talk about my other siblings, they had one step parent, and then at the end there was two step parents raising
Right.
the younger. So that just a very different experience.
And your father also passed away. When did that happen?
And so, yes, when a few months before I graduated high school, so I was 18, he had a heart attack and died. Just a sudden heart attack, immediately died. There was no hospital. It was just a very sudden experience.
Wow. Wow. So before you were 18 years old, your
Yeah,
experience with,
just a few days after my birthday, yes. So I
okay,
just
so
turned 18.
at 18, your experience with death was, it always comes as a tragedy and there's no preparation. And now my life is completely different.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, after my mom died, I started thinking, oh, that's so terrible. God would never. So you start feeling temporary, like suddenly your foundation's rocked, and you're like something that was so permanent. And like, wait a minute, that maybe this isn't. So then I'm like, well, wait, what if my dad died? I'm like, oh, that would never happen. God would
Right.
never do that.
Right.
And then it happened. And yeah, I don't know. Yeah, didn't think it could happen, and it did.
I really appreciate that. I think most people would feel like you already won the bad lottery. How in the world could it come around again?
Right.
So how did you feel about that at the time? Were you angry with God? I mean, you talked about feeling a loss of stability, I'm sure.
Stability for sure. I am grateful for this, but I honestly can say I don't think I ever felt angry at God. And I will, I guess I would credit my parents. Honestly, the greatest gift I think they gave me to prepare, because one of your questions was like, how would you prepare for somebody to handle grief? I would say the best thing they ever did was to teach me the gospel of Jesus Christ. Because then you have the foundation that can't be rocked, right? And you have knowledge and you have this guidance. And so during that time, I don't feel like I ever felt angry at God, because I had been taught that there is a loving God and a plan of happiness. And so that was really, I'm so grateful that that was instilled. Like I knew that. And so I know I don't feel like I ever felt that angry to God. I will tell you one unreasonable anger I would have. And this is a
Yeah.
little ridiculous, but I would see people like older women who had mothers, like they'd be out with their moms, and like a 50-year-old mom with her mom. And I'm like, what the heck? Like, why is
Uh-huh.
that okay? Why do you get to have a mom when you don't need a mom?
Yes, yes,
And in my
yes.
brain, I knew it was unreasonable. But I'm like, I would honestly battle that anger. Like, Marcy, stop thinking that. I'm grateful they have a mom, but inside I'm like, what's the deal?
No, it's totally unfair. I totally get it. Okay, first, I shouldn't say I totally get it, that I didn't have your experience, but I can really see how normal that would be to be like, oh,
Yeah.
I kind of am annoyed seeing you out, with your
Yeah.
80-year-old mom and you're
Yeah.
60.
Yeah. Yeah.
I-
Uh,
so that makes me so that it brings up a question in my mind, Margaret, that maybe you can address. You talked about having really wonderful parents. Was faith a big part of your growing up? Do you think that influenced your sister when she was raising her kids?
Oh, I'm sure it was. And my mother was the example to me during grief because she lost two daughters. But I have to say when Marci's mother passed away, I was angry with God because we lost another mother in our family. And we had prayed for her after the accident and everything. And I went through a period of, well, what good is prayer? Why? So I went a few days and then I thought, well, it's really hard not to pray when you're used to praying all the time. And then the thought said, well, I'm going to be in despair and bad things are always going to happen. So either I can go through life with prayer and with the Savior, or I could just go through life in despair. And I learned from that experience that that's how to go through life's tragedies.
I really appreciate that. Thank you for sharing that. I think it's such an important point to emphasize here that you lost the same person, even though the relationship was different. Margaret lost a sister, Marci lost a mother, but it's such an important thing to point out that you both grieved differently in the moment for that same person. And I really appreciate your honesty about that. I appreciate what your thoughts were, Marci, and I really appreciate you sharing, Margaret, that you had anger on behalf of these children, right? Who weren't necessarily experiencing the anger themselves or herself.
Mm-hmm.
That's just an interesting thing to think about when we watch other people grieve. So what I haven't heard about is a little bit more about your mom, your sister. Tell us about her personality, what you guys loved about her. Maybe Margaret, you start with your perspective as growing up with her as a sister, and then Marci, tell me a little bit about, and your dad. I'd like to hear about your dad too. I want to make sure that we don't leave him out because this is these are your foundational relationships.
Virginia was my oldest sister and the best sister anyone could ever have. We just loved her, and she never complained if we followed her around and she doted on us sometimes. My mother once said it was like having another helper around. She was very vivacious and outgoing and adventurous. She had always had lots of friends, did musicals in high school. She taught swimming lessons during the summer, and all of us younger sisters were able to have swimming lessons from her. And then we remember when she met Don, and she was dating someone else at the same time, but then Don was really a fun member of our family and his own personality, and they're both very attractive. You know, they're dark, handsome. Virginia was beautiful and a lovely couple. Every once in a while, she'd get a little upset with us. She also wanted things a certain way if we weren't doing things, but a very lovely, outgoing, adventurous person.
I love it. And Marci, how do you remember your mom and your dad?
Yes, I'm coming from a lens of a 15-year-old who, of course, if you're self-centered as a 15-year-old, so you don't really get to see them as a real person.
Right.
But my memories is she was just a very kind, like a kind mom, but a kind person to other people, and always calm. And well, for me, I don't know if Margaret knows. I think she was just the calm. But for me, I remember one of her sayings, and I attributed it to her because it's associated with her saying, never get upset unless something's life-threatening. And my whole life, I've thought about okay, don't get upset about this. So my feelings about her, just so calm. And she was always there. Like 7 kids, but she was always at my game. She was always there taking me. She was just such a presence in my life. And even at 15, right before she died, I still felt like she was my best friend. Like,
Oh,
walk around with my arm around her, hold her hand in the mall. Like, I
oh,
hadn't had that feeling of I didn't want my mom. I still was, it's me and my mom. So
yeah.
she engendered those really close relationships with me. Um, and my dad was super charming, just funny, charming, but also like, we work hard. Like, this is how you're tough. And he'd teach us girls how to like self-defense and block and punch. If this guy comes and bugs you, let me show you how you're going to defend yourself. And put me in like the boys' baseball team because girls can do anything. Um, and so, yeah, I was raised with a lot of confidence in myself because I think from my dad and my mom. But yeah, just really, really solid, wonderful parents.
That's they sound amazing. And of course, it's fair to say if they had lived long enough to raise all of the rest of your siblings, it's probably very likely they would have had a very similar experience,
Yeah.
that they
Yeah.
would have parented their children that's with that same intensity and love
Right.
and 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 that itself is I'm sure part of the heartache
Yeah. I think
for
that's probably that what could have been is probably a place I don't go.
right, exactly, because we can't know that. That's
Yeah.
somebody else's story.
Yeah.
So um Margaret, at the time when you had already experienced that great tragedy of losing your other sister, um, and her name was Letty.
Glenna.
Lena. You had lost Lena, so you were already grieving a sister. Your family, the family dynamic changes when one person is gone.
It does.
And that's true universally, right? You could have one kid at a sleepover and be like, wow, everybody's getting along better. No, I'm just kidding. That's how it was in my house with the
Yes, it is.
right. But when somebody's really gone, your family dynamic changes. And how how did you um, interact with your nieces and nephews after Lena and now after Virginia?
Yes, I think that's part of the grieving also is to see them as motherless whenever you get together. And so you feel that pain. But I attribute my mother to bringing us all together. And she would have all the gatherings at her house, and everyone always felt comfortable there, and she worked really hard to make sure that we got together often, or we all just, whenever I visited, someone always came by. And I just, two things that she helped me with is after my Glenna passed away, she said she had prayed and said, I don't want to be comforted. Don't comfort me. Just, I'm going to be in this grief. And yet she still felt the Spirit comfort her after that, although she was in deep grief.
Yeah.
And then when my sister Virginia died, and that pain is worse because you're doing it again, and to see another mother and another daughter pass away, she was so strong at the funeral, and people would come. My sister's friends would come by in tears, and she would comfort them, which made me angry that they put her in that position. But then when they closed the casket, she was so tender.
Yeah.
But she also mentioned at one time that after my sister Virginia died, she realized she would never feel joy again, and that was the way life would be. And you just go forward, do what you can, but you don't ever have to feel joy again. But I remember her in church one time getting up and saying that she has felt joy again, and that there is joy in life. And it's probably Marci and all the grandchildren that brought that joy to her. And so she was our example of being strong in grief, gathering, and bringing us together.
Thank you. I appreciate you sharing that, especially the part about feeling joy. I think I don't know if I've met anyone who hasn't said they didn't know if they would ever feel joy again. I know I felt that. I could say I haven't. At this point, I wouldn't say that in my life, but there was a time when I could say, yeah, I haven't felt joy in months. I haven't felt joy in years. I don't know if I'll feel joy again. That's a really pernicious part of grief, right? The belief that you are just going to have to kind of bob in the water the rest of your life, instead of feeling like a fully human person experiencing life. What was your experience with that, Marci?
Well, I wanted to add to what Margaret said. I think, like what I was saying before, the best preparation for handling grief in my life that my parents gave me, I think, was that for sure the gospel of Jesus Christ. But number two, they both really valued um, family and getting together with family. So my whole childhood, like Margaret said, we gathered. I knew my cousins, my aunts, my uncles. I had some really strong relationships with them. And when my parents passed, it was almost, I shouldn't say it's too late to build those relationships, but it was essential that they were already there and that they already were strong. And so I just had such comfort and strength just because I had those relationships. And it's not like they had to come and do something,
Mm-hmm.
though they did. Margaret visited, grandma visited, they made us this meal plan. I still remember looking at the meal plan that my aunts made and these
Oh,
little things. But the major thing was I had a strong relationship with them beforehand. And then because of that, they were that strength, even if they didn't know it.
that is so, so beautiful. And that makes total sense. And I think what you're saying is really essential, that because the relationships were intact, and that was my experience also, the relationships that were intact were an incredible blessing, an incredible strength at a time when I felt like half a person. I felt so wounded, and yet that that love, that gathering. And that being said, it's never too late to build relationships,
Okay.
right? Because even at the present time, those relationships, if they have been strained or just not close, can now be a blessing. But I had a similar experience that I was so grateful for the close relationships.
Yeah.
And good for your mother and your grandmother for taking that as a responsibility to gather her family.
Well, and even my dad's side, it was from their side, there was 12 uncles and aunts. And so
Wow.
I just had this incredible safety net. The
Wow.
extended family was that net.
You had a whole amphitheater of
I did.
love
I did.
around you. That's really fortunate. Has that affected your experience with your own children? Are you a gatherer?
Well, I only have three, and it's pretty easy to gather. But I look at my siblings, and I think it's interesting that everybody has different roles in that. And there are a couple, and it's not me, that are gatherers, that
Mm,
they do get people together. And I love that because it's not my natural tendency or talent, but it is my sisters and it is my brothers. And
mm.
that gathering, yes, it is really important.
So they're
But yeah,
continuing to bless this extended family.
well, and yeah, so trying to build an extended family for my children, right? With,
Right.
yeah. Anyway, it, it's a good thought because I had thinking about it for myself, but then I think, well, what about my kids? Did I do that? Is it too late? Now they're grown, but oh, I needed this a while ago.
And how about you, Margaret? Uh, is that something you feel like you consciously have done from the example of your mom? Because I know you gather your family a lot.
I think so. And uh, I worked hard to get us to have family reunions together with everyone. That you asked me once what responsibility did I feel for the nieces and nephews, and I did feel some responsibility, especially as I was single when it happened, and wondered if I should change my life and be there
Right.
more often. And when Glenna died, I was on when she was diagnosed with cancer, I was on my mission. And I remember praying, "Oh, take me. I don't have children. I'm not a mother. I can go. It'll be great." And I had this strong impression that my experience here on earth part of it that was so important was to be a mother and have children and have my own family. And then later, before Glenna died, I was visiting with her in the hospital. And again, and she gave me the same advice as, don't continue your life and do those things. But then I do have some guilt feelings, Marci, that I didn't do more with all of you. So at least you reassured me that at least you felt that there was some there.
Yeah, you were
So
doing it. You just didn't know it.
the last couple of years, as family has gotten bigger and spread out, it's been harder to come together. Probably Marci was the last one, I think, that gathered us. So you did gather us then. So we're still trying to work on that. But yes, I love I have 4 children, 3 boys and a daughter that we love, and we're together with them this summer. And it really makes me feel happy that they want to get together. And that brings me joy. And I love gathering with family and with friends.
I love that. And maybe this is a good kind of shout out message to women who are on the periphery of others, of family members who are grieving, to kind of take some initiative, gather that family, bring them in, whatever your relationship is, if you're a cousin, an aunt, a sister, bring those families together. I know from personal experience what it's like to be in a family where both of my grandmothers passed away before I was probably 6 years old. So my experience is that I have amazing, wonderful aunts and uncles, but my grandfathers, neither of them were gatherers. So I don't have a lot of memories of gathering together, especially on my mom's side. On my dad's side, when his mother passed away, he was an adult and he had adult sisters, and I think all of those siblings have kind of tried to, to gather family, and I love them. And I could call any of them at a moment's notice. but I do wish that we had, especially when I was a child. I wish that I had that kind of gathering, and I spent my childhood trying to adopt grandmothers because I wanted so much to have that experience, and I'm I appreciate your words of wisdom there. So, Marci, I wonder if you could talk a little bit to your experience of. I'm assuming you met your husband after your dad passed away. Is that right?
Yes, yes.
So, by the time you were an adult and having this major, major new life relationship, you had lost both of your parents. How can you just tell me about these different life phases that you went through, courtship, marriage, children, without having your parents?
Um, I will say that until up to about this point when I finally became a grandma is when I think I stopped thinking back, I need my parents, right? And so it was in the back of my mind, like, what would it be like if I had parents? What would it be like if I called my mom?
Mm-hmm.
Um, but a lot of times those thoughts are a little too painful, and I don't know if they are helpful.
Mm-hmm.
So going through those different stages, what would I say? I think, well, my husband's never met my parents. What would they have thought? Um, I don't know, but I don't know if that was ever helpful for me to think that way. I think though that it affected me in like some ways. I might think I felt quite nervous about losing my husband throughout my life.
Mm-hmm.
Like that was something on my mind a lot. But I I started praying young that God would allow me and my husband to have a long life with my children, and that is a constant prayer for me. And I'm betting on that. Like I'm good with that. But that has been my mind a lot. Is not just I, and not just because I don't want to feel that loss with me and my husband. It's that I can't stand the thought of my kids feeling that pain. And so sometimes my poor husband, I harp on him too much. It's like, his health and his exercise and all this stuff protecting your life. And pretty soon he's like, Marty, I'm fine. I'm like, you don't understand. And he's like, yeah, he probably doesn't. So I have to like pull myself back with, okay, relax, Marcy. It's not fair to my husband to put pressure on him because of this insecurity. But yeah, that fear of my kids feeling that pain, that was through their growing up years, that was really a strong feeling for me. And I think it lessens as they're older now and they're adults.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I think that was something that, um, yeah, I dealt with, is that fear of them losing a parent. Um, I've thought about this, that I think is interesting when, losing, when you're a teenager, your feelings are so intense. And so I think about this a lot, like losing two parents as a teenager. And are those feelings ultra intense? Would have been the same if I'd been an adult? How has that feeling that intense pain young in my life affected my emotional health later? My husband was involved in this research of trainees. Often they experience pain with different procedures when they're born, and they're and life-saving procedures. A lot of times there is some pain involved. And the research was, did this pain sensitize their stomach so that when they're older children, they have functional abdominal pain? And this was this study. And I thought about that. I'm like, what if, like, when you experience such emotional pain young in your life, does that make you a little extra sensitive when you're older to pain? And I wonder, like when I get my feelings hurt in marriage or when things happen, am I feeling too intense pain? Am I being too sensitive because of this pain I felt and dealing with, I don't know. Am I feeling it too strongly and more people don't feel it this way? So I guess I did a lot of self-analysis with my emotional health, but I don't know, that intense pain I felt as a teenager, it was strong for a lot of years. Like that, it was a physical pain for a lot of years.
Right, right. People don't always they don't always recognize how exhausting and physical and painful that grief can be.
Yeah. Yeah.
How have you dealt with it? Did you do counseling or any kind of therapy or or
We
has
did not.
it
No, there was a lot of self-help there. Here's something, I don't know if this is interesting, but I've thought about it. When my mom died, I thought about what if my dad died? And then I would mentally go through what would it feel like? I would feel this, and I could, because the pain was so raw and so new, I felt that mourning. And then it kind of continued. I started, well, what if my stepmom died? And every once in a while I'd go through this process and I got married. Well, what if my husband died? And I could honestly take myself through these intense, painful experiences that I shouldn't have had to experience, but I was pre-experiencing them. Like, I might as well get it over with now. And then I got to where I had children, and I'm like, what if my child died? And at that point, it became too painful. And the
Mhm.
experience, I started thinking, this is not healthy. I don't need to be experiencing this pain to prepare myself. And so I honestly had to just use a lot of self discipline and say, I'm not going to do this anymore. And it had become a habit. And I don't know if you'd call it like self harm in a way of emotional, like you were making yourself
Mm.
feel these terrible feelings. But I had to just stop myself when I went there. No, I'm not doing that anymore. This is not good for me. I'm just not going to do it anymore. So a lot of the times where I was in the darkest places, I had to use a lot of just self discipline, knowing that's not good. I'm not going to do that anymore. This is not like a right and wrong, almost became a moral issue to me. Like, this is not okay to do. I'm going to stop.
I love what you're saying. I love the phrase you used, emotional self-harm. I think that's a real, and that to me sounds very different than experiencing the natural waves of grief,
Hmm.
right? We're going to experience triggers and we're going to experience grief, but that seems like a different thing, this idea of emotional self-harm. So I love that you brought that up, and I think it's a great uh, I think it's a great thing that you were able to use some cognitive thinking and discipline in order to push through that. I think that's fantastic. And I think a lot of times a good counselor or therapist probably helps you to discover those kinds of things,
Yeah.
right? What are your thoughts on this, Margaret?
I really appreciate what Marci just shared with us because, from our viewpoint, Marci would be the one that grieved well and went on with her life happily and achieved things. And so I don't think we realized all the pain and worry that she had also. And so I I think so many times we look at people who are grieving and sometimes we think, oh, they're grieving too much. They need to get on with their life. It's stopping their progression. But then on other times, we wonder, oh, are they grieving? Because of the way that they handle things. And so I just think grief is really personal, and grieving well doesn't always happen for everyone.
Mhm.
And it's just really hard. But one thing I have found in our family, our extended family, with cousins and all the things that they're going through, is there's a resiliency there and hope. I think that is a DNA in our blood from our parents.
So, Marci, you mentioned a stepmom. Tell me about your experience, your interaction with other adults in your life that maybe took on parental roles. How did they come into your life, and how did you feel about this role that they may have been playing for you?
Well, yeah, my dad remarried um, about a year, 2 years after my mom died. And then my stepmom took on a big role. Like we had 7 kids, she had one. And then she was only married to him maybe 2 years and he passed away. So her experience in itself is an amazing one, I'm sure. Um, but I was older, so I was basically going out of the house at that point. But there was like I had a parents of one of my very close friends. They took me in. They were just so kind, took me on trips, just kind of mothered and fathered me. And at one point, I wanted really badly to call it mom and dad. I just wanted to say it again. Um, and I just couldn't. I physically could not say the words to them. And anyway, as I grew and I got married and I had a mom and dad, and I really wanted to do it, and it was so difficult for me. But I made that choice. I'm like, okay, I really want to do it. I want to call them mom and dad. So I kind of forced myself at that point to start calling them mom and dad. And a lot of it was for them too, because I wanted them to feel that connection to me. I wanted that relationship and that love. I didn't want, I don't know, I just felt strongly about wanting that. And of course, my in-laws were so gracious and wonderful and deserved that tile, right? And then I experienced it later when my son got married, and his wife is so cute, and she called us by our first names for a while, and it wasn't bothering me. I still felt so young. Like, how could I be a mother-in-law?
Right.
I'm like, oh, and then she told me, she's like, I'm really working on, I want to call you mom and dad. And it was so touching to me that she wanted to do that. And so I could tell at first she was forcing herself to do this. And it was so sweet. And it became more natural. But those first times of that, it was almost painful, honestly, to call somebody mom and dad because it brought up the loss again, and that word had so much association. But here, looking over the years, I'm so grateful for those relationships, and I did decide to do that, to give that name to somebody else and create these other relationships that have been so important to me.
Thank you for sharing that. I kind of attribute that to a lack in our language, right? Because in English, we don't do well with roles that are nurturing, that aren't very specific and directly biologically connected, right? Your mom is the person who gave birth to you and raised you and loved you and then became the grandmother of your children. And then, you know, and I envy other cultures and languages where, in some cultures where anyone who's an adult and is not your biological parent is your auntie,
Yeah.
your uncle, your tia, your tio. My son is married to a girl from Norway, and in Norwegian, it's kind of brilliant, right? They have several ways of saying, of calling somebody a grandparent. For example, you have your mormor is your mother's mom, your farmor is your father's mom, or you can be bestemor, which is also grandma, or bestefar is also grandpa. And then I know they have friends whose parents are remarried, and that step parent is then Besta Bjorn instead of Bestefar, right? That I wish that we had that so that we could honor the closeness of the nurturing without feeling so awkward about assigning the sacred name of one person to somebody who's being very nurturing.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. Let's shift the conversation just a tiny bit here, because Margaret, you yourself are a cancer survivor. And
I am.
So I wondered if you could speak to that experience of having lost a sister to the same disease you were diagnosed with years later. Is that right? Or was it a different?
Yes, it was years later. In fact, I attribute her, Glenna, the reason I'm alive, because I did mammograms yearly, and it was actually, I had cancer a couple of years before they really saw, until it got aggressive, and then was diagnosed. But in my case, it hadn't gone to the lymph nodes. And so I went from a 50% survival rate to 85%. And I just, the fact that she had it, and it is in our, breast cancer is in our family. Another sister, Eva, a couple of years ago, had breast cancer, and we've had a couple of nieces that have had breast cancer also, and we love them, and we're glad that they're all surviving. I did face the fact that I might die and leave children, and I think the only thing I did during cancer that I thought could be different is I didn't face that fact. I just wanted everything to be normal until I was gone, so that, because I figured it'd be hard enough for them afterwards anyway. Mm-hmm. But I think if I would have offered to have, the children are young, the oldest, was 9, the youngest was 9. But I just felt like, they'll have a hard enough time afterwards if I go. And so I just tried to make life as normal as possible. But life was not normal, and they knew that all this was going on, and they were worried about losing a mom. And I wish I would have talked about it more, or involved them more in chores and in different things like that. But I really feel that my life was spared because of Glenna and those experiences.
Because it puts you on a path of prevention that you might not have been on.
Right. But it also helped me. It was a turning point for me to turn more to the Savior and more to face your own mortality. And it was a turning point for me to do that and not take life as for granted that you do, because you just, you're busy with 4 children. You always death might be in the back of your mind, but never in the forefront.
I like what you're saying. It seems like it goes back to this balance, right, between living intentionally, being aware of your mortality, but not going to that emotional self-harm that Marci had talked about, right? There's a range there, and there must be kind of a healthy area in that range. right? Which,
Right.
the pendulum can swing to being so unaware that you don't prepare, that you don't, can't even, have conversations about the normal aspect of life, which includes our mortality. But then, to the other extreme where everything is fearful and painful. That's that's not a healthy swing either. It would be interesting to know what your children would say about that time period for them.
Yeah, it would be.
That'd be an interesting conversation to have. Nice little, campfire, getting the s'mores out. What were you guys thinking when I was diagnosed with cancer?
They're
but
like,
maybe,
no, that was so long ago.
and maybe normalizing these conversations is also a good thing.
Right. And I think my children and Marci's generation is so much better of discussing emotions and talking about emotions and acknowledging the feelings that they're going through. Tom and I are not good at that. And my children will tell you that. But you're right. It would be good to have some of those conversations.
So that makes me wonder, Marci, how did you have the conversation about mortality with your children, or is it a conscious thought?
I don't think I've talked to them much about it. Um, even my brothers and sisters, there was one time when one of the in-laws got us together and we sat down and we did start talking about memories, and it was so fulfilling talking with them about it. But I honestly don't think I tell my kids about my parents, but I don't think I talk about them a lot enough, because when my youngest is like, Mom, you just don't talk about my grandpa enough. I need to know about him more.
Mm.
And I, you know what? I think it's because was painful. And I've got a younger brother that asks, can you tell me memories of mom and dad? And we haven't fulfilled that obligation very well. And I think it's because we know there's a pain there. And yeah, that's one thing I have not done well, is talk about my mom and dad with my kids. And really, even with my husband, I don't think I've really shared, because it is so painful. You kind of don't want to put people through that. I don't think I've really sufficiently talked to them about it.
It would be interesting to see how your children would respond, right, to
Mhm.
that, because um, sometimes when you see the tenderness in someone as they remember that person they love, it your heart then just swells with love,
True.
right, for them, and because they're not going to necessarily be able to feel your pain connected to it, but I feel pretty certain they would feel the great love.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, it's one of the reasons I always like to hear about these people that we've lost as you remember them, right? What made them
Mhm.
special? What made them unique? What did you love about them? What are memories that you appreciate about them? It's I heard somebody recently at church say, I know that pain and peace can coexist. I thought that was a very profound statement. So, how do you feel like you have changed, Marci, as a person because of your experiences? And I recognize that your experiences happened as a teenager, so you were going to go through profound changes
Mhm.
anyway.
Right. It was at a time where you are developing your sense of self, right? And your personality and your values. What has it? I guess I don't know if it changed me, but because of it, maybe I have this. I think maybe an extra value of like relationships and small moments, and um, I don't know how precious those little things are, the little experiences, milestones that you get to see. I think I maybe value them more than maybe if I hadn't experienced it. Close relationships, my siblings, and I feel like we as siblings have an extra like uh want so badly for them to succeed and have a happy life and that connection. I feel like we have that helped engender a very strong bond with each other, siblings. Maybe I
Wow.
don't know if I would have had it before, but I know I have it now.
Wow. Th- have you noticed that, Margaret, in these children
Oh
of
yeah,
your sister Virginia?
yeah. Yes, Marcy's siblings are very close and have gathered together a lot, and also my sister Glenna's children really look to each other and are concerned and want to help each other and have stepped in to do that.
That must really bring you a lot of joy, because that's something you feared or worried about years before when you were looking at your role as a single aunt.
Yes, but you still wish they didn't have to go through so much and that life is still very, very difficult and want them to feel loved and supported. And we hope we're doing that.
Hmm. Thank you both so much for everything you shared. And thank you for I love that I got to peek in on the sweet friendship that you have with each other. It's so obvious that you love each other, and I'm thankful that you would discuss these things with me. So before we end, I would love to ask you both. Maybe we'll start with you, Marci, and then end with you, Margaret. What do you think it means to grieve well?
Um, you know, grief is this loss, right? That's basically what it is. Be it a parent or a sister or a marriage or some terrible loss. So for me, I think that grieving well is maybe through grief, you can add something to your life because you've had this loss. So what if grieving well is that you add something, you build, so you could add perspective. Maybe I can add compassion, ability to treasure people, and maybe mercy. So I look at grieving well as adding something to your life because of the loss.
Thank you. I love that.
I would say that grieving well is understanding other people's grief and being able to feel like you can go and talk to them where before I would have not wanted to cross over into that, but to feel like I can. And I feel like grieving well is a hope and knowing that we're not alone and that we're watched over and that we can be supported spiritually and with friends and family.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that too. And you did do that for me. You and Tom have definitely reached out to me, and I
Thanks
appreciate.
for enough, right?
Yeah. Well, again, thank you so much. Appreciate all that you had to share.
Thanks,
Thank you,
Julie.
Julie.